For this third episode, obviously, we're going to discuss recruitment 2.0 and the future of work. And what we want to do really is look at the macro trends and the needs for organisations going forwards, such as adapting current recruitment documentation and processes to fit the new reality and allowing inclusive organisations and cultures to flourish. But also, I think one of the key questions will be, what are the opportunities for the future in terms of both talent and ED&I provision and businesses probably in general, as we've been thinking very much on the sort of macro strategic perspective, and filtering these things down. What are so the opportunities going forward for business in general? So many thanks for joining me again, Kim. I think if we just start off with the first question, just to get things going. So, given the need to reappraise equality, diversity and inclusion, ED&I, in a business-friendly way, how can we make ourselves stand out as candidates, talent, people available for work either within or outside of organisations?
Yeah, so we only act for employers in our wavelength, but I can certainly use what we know from the employer side to relate to the candidate side. So what I would say is, yeah, so we're massive advocates. If you've watched episode 1 and 2, then you'll know that we're massive advocates for a value and cultural-led approach, and focusing on, and employers certainly focusing on the 4 key areas, which I reiterate, which are value and cultural fit. So does the person fit into the team, believe in the same vision, and is going the same direction, and can they operate in the environment that this company is operating and having? The second one is the motivation. What motivations does the person need to do this job effectively? So are they motivated to work in your particular environment and do this particular job? Thirdly, can they sit in your environment, as in, not as in physically sit, but can they sit in, if your environment is, as an employer, if it's fast paced, if it's fast moving, if the person coming in is not going to be comfortable with that, then they shouldn't be looking in this particular business. And then lastly, do you have the ability to do the job? And that's something you should measure. So what we advocate for employers is to create criteria around those 4 key areas. And what that does is it massively opens up their ability to find people from a huge diverse range of backgrounds. So to go back to the question, what can you do to stand out? Is from the candidate side, what I would say is search for those. What are your personal values? Follow the approach that we've just laid out from a personal perspective. So what are you about? Where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do? What is it you want to achieve with your career, and what are your aspirations with your career? And have a really good understanding of what those are. So what are your personal values? What do you believe, and what do you strongly believe? Because I think for too often people have looked at work, and there's a statistic that I'll bring out again, which I talked about earlier, which is from a Gallup poll, which is 89% of people are either unhappy or very unhappy in their work. And that is due to a poor cultural or value fit. And that works both ways. So if you're looking for a job, you need to understand what you're about as an individual, what your values are. And then secondly, what is it that motivates you? What are you looking for? Are you looking for a place of work that's going to include you in what they're doing, where you've got your voices, you've got a say in what you're trying in the direction of the company? Do you want somewhere where you can progress over a period of time? Then thirdly, what's the environment you're looking for? Is it a place where that allows remote working? Is about flexibility? Is that does that really drive you? Or do you want, even if you're remote working, do you want a set day where you know what you're doing every hour of the day? Because you can look at companies and you can see from the way that they communicate and what they do whether they would fall into this category. And then lastly is, don't look at the job in terms of and certainly something we advocate is the previous experience is if you haven't got sector experience, or it doesn't matter, it's have you got the ability to do the job. And if you can communicate that well in the way that when you apply for a position, because ultimately that's what people are looking for. They're understanding whether, one, do you buy into what they buy into? Two, can you do the job and you're motivated to do it? Three, can you work in our environment? Four, have you got the capability? If you spin that from your personal perspective and try and find those companies that do match your personal values, then I think you will be much better when you end up speaking to these people at creating a match. And ultimately you'll be in a job that you want to be in, and you'll feel motivated and positive about working for the future. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. I think endeavouring to find some form of match and work out where your career is going and where you want it to go, if you can steer it, is very important. So that's brilliant. And I guess this next one is one that we can both answer, and there's several of these. In terms of how do you think an effective recruitment strategy or approach might look in the future? I mean, it seems as though Wavelengths is fairly future-proof already, but just for organisations more generally.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is to take recruitment and not as a something that you leave until you've got a problem or an issue, and start to look forward and plan for as a strategy, as part of like you would with anything else in your business. And certainly where we see ourselves as a partner for your people recruitment strategy going forward, rather than fixing your problems that you might have in the first place. So I think the first place to look in terms of future-proofing your business is to look into the future and understand what it is that, what does your future growth look like? And what does your future business look like? Because an interesting thing is that a lot of jobs being created today didn't exist 5 years ago. And a lot of jobs that have been around for a long time will no longer exist. So if you start looking and thinking, okay, so how do you find people for jobs that don't exist? The way you do that is by following the approach that we've been talking about, which is understanding what you're about and your value and your culture, without going over it again, is once you've understood what that is, and then building that in terms of your future strategy, it's much easier for you to find people, because you're not limiting yourself with the talent that's out there, because the talent could be anyone. So that's certainly the first thing that I would say, and we would say, is to start looking at recruitment as a strategic point that you need to look at on a regular basis going forward, in line with your financial strategy, your business strategy, and ultimately your people strategy going with it. But sadly, it's often left to the last minute, and then take your recruitment and try and turn it into a process that everyone buys into in a unbiased way, and everyone is working off the same criteria, is working to the same timescales, because that's another area where recruitment goes wrong, is that people don't have a set process of way of doing things. So what is your recruitment process? Is it you advertise your position, people might ask some questions, then you have a chat to them on the phone? Do you do any testing? We would advocate some sort of we would advocate after you've met them, or if you've done a video call, or if you've met them in person, to do some sort of capability based test. So can they actually do the job? But what is your recruitment process? Because again, people don't have this nailed down. And also, I mean, there's obvious stuff like we will often see, we've got different people coming in at different times. Is they've got different, they won't be aware of what's gone on before. So you might have someone coming in generally without, you know, it's generally a director or someone will come in at the end. They'll come involved in the second part of the second interview. So there'll have been the initial, you know, they've advertised, gone through it. The hiring manager's been involved in it, and then the director will walk in. I've been guilty of this in the past. Walked in, had a chat, and gone, "Oh, I like you. Do you want a job?" And you've completely discounted your entire process that you've created in the past. So it's absolutely critical that everyone, and absolutely everyone, no one should be excluded from this in your organisation, is crystal clear on what is your criteria, and create a structure that allows that in a really unbiased way.
Super. And I completely agree. One thing I would add here, and this is one of our pet hates, I know Kimmy was saying something you didn't deal with too much earlier, is the rather poor, or dare I say incorrect, use of psychometrics, which I'd just like to clear out. I'm not saying for psychometrics lovers or researchers here that psychometrics is bad, or the tests are bad. They're not. They're very useful, but often in recruitment contexts, the way they're used to sift people in, you know, if you've got a large talent pool that you're trying to sift through, is actually not the way in which the tests were designed. A lot of psychometric tests are actually designed to fit, to work out what attributes, skills, competencies people have and can bring to a particular context or organization. And the problem with using them readily in recruitment, or at the early stages of recruitment, as we tend to do so, is that you can be taught how to fill in the tests in order to achieve a particular outcome, i.e. to near enough get the job, or at least get a chance of getting an interview. Where it's actually that fit may be completely different when you look at the organisation. So yeah, I would always say use psychometrics internally as a development tool to work out where you want to put everybody in the team, but don't necessarily use it to the same extent in a front-end, near enough onboard recruitment process. Although I do admit that for larger organisations, I mean, your experience within the Big Four, Kim, you do need to have some way of filtering thousands and thousands of applications for limited availability of roles.
You do. You absolutely do. I mean, one thing that what we do is because if we've created the criteria with the employer, then we do a lot of that first round sort of filtering for them, and we'll present a shortlist of, say, up to a maximum of 8 people. So to give you some ideas of volumes of applications, it depends obviously on the job. The lower entry in terms of skill level, obviously you're going to get more applications. But we did a job recently where they were looking for analysts for a research and development tax business. It was a completely new job. There's not a set career path for this position. It's someone who's got is an analytical person, is interested in understanding detail and researching into something. We had 350 applications for that position. But then we asked questions which are centered around the 4 areas which we've talked about. That then got whittled down to about 70, which is still a huge number of people. We then whittled out that further. Now, psychometrics, I 100% agree with you. They're great in the right context. And if you've gone through the time of understanding all the things that we've been talking about, psychometrics is not going to tell you any more or any less than, because as you said, there's a test that you can learn how to do. It's putting everyone into a same category or pigeonholing someone into, if you're like this, you're going to be good. When we've been talking about over the last 3 episodes how we're all different. So it's absolutely, yeah.
It creates problems for diversity. I was doing a project with another diversity consultant recently, and they came up with a very good comment on this. And it was something like, in trying to reduce bias and increase diversity, what you're actually doing is you're creating, and remove the barriers, you're creating a larger, even more significant barrier or inhibitor to get over, just by saying, well, if you don't pass this to a certain level, you don't go any further.
Yeah,
you've just replaced one problem from solving a different but fairly similar one.
Well, yeah, and also it's on the predication that you can understand and you're an expert in this particular psychometric test, and certainly in our experience, you're not. I'm not as an employer. I mean, I've got some horror stories. I mean, one that comes to mind is we work with a very large business and to find people for their team in a sales role, so a telesales role, so as a telesales executive. And their process was, they had an initial, you had to give in your CV, you had to answer some questions, you had to have a telephone interview, you had to have a face-to-face interview, and then, so that's 4 steps you've had to go through. And then the last step was you had to do a psychometric test. Now, the director of this particular organization had decided the best people for this particular role met a certain personality trait. And if you didn't fit that personality trait, then you wouldn't get the job. So basically, out of, I think the example was that effectively about 50, 60 people came through this process, and 1 person got hired and the only reason they got hired was because they fit the personality type that this director was looking for. So it completely negated everything else that was going on before. And we subsequently stopped working with them because it was just ridiculous.
Yes, as I say, it creates all sorts of problems for diversity in all of the major sub-considerations that we have to think about.
I suppose one question, what do you, so I've thought about, what's your views on an effective recruitment strategy in the future? What do you think?
I think it's got to be much more competency-based. I think it's got to be recruitment based primarily on skills. And skills not just within sector or within roles, but actually what skills, what life experience have people picked up as a result of their career and life journeys that we can bring into the business, makes us more nimble, more agile, more profitable, more productive.
Yeah.
And I don't think the answer is necessarily filling in overly long application forms and doing psychometric tests and worrying too much about rigid interview preparations. I mean, obviously you've got to have an interview, you've got to go through certain stages, but a lot of the processes, particularly from a diversity perspective, in terms of thinking about the extra logistics to even get to a location or to, which admittedly is probably less relevant in a COVID scenario or post-COVID, but yeah, in all of the additional considerations that you have to, that someone with an additional or supported needs to consider, it needs to be much more accessible and you need to be able to demonstrate what your skills are likely to be, rather than putting overly complex I hate to use the term, but barriers or difficulties in the way when a diverse talent pool has the experience, it's got the willingness, to actually move forward, think outside the box. Particularly people who have overcome difficulties in their own either personal lives or in other organisations are ideally suited to problem solvers, strategic roles of any sort. And I think we've really got to think about much more about what the overall skills are in relation to where the business strategy is going and what the short, medium and long-term outlook is, rather than does someone fit a role that's 10 years out of date.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think there's a time and place for questions, and certainly again, like we encourage, so we really encourage you setting that criteria right in the first place, but then using that all the way through in a consistent way throughout your whole process, and then you can make it as simple as you like, because as long as you're consistent, the key to success in recruitment is understanding what you're looking for, why you're looking for it, and then being consistent with it throughout your whole journey. And ultimately, if you do that, then you'll get it right.
Yeah, super. A final question, but I think there may be a joint one for us at the end. But a final one for you then, Kim. What can SMEs, and admittedly we've begun to discuss this anyway, what can SMEs do to help future-proof their business going forward, either post-COVID, post-Brexit, or any other time in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, it very much ties into what we were talking about earlier on in this episode, and obviously the previous 2 episodes as well. But I think the main thing that SMEs can do to future-proof themselves is understand that there is a massively diverse potential talent pool sitting out there of fantastic people that they might not have even considered, and that would love to work in a small to medium-sized business, because that business is hopefully growing, will be inclusive to what they want, will value their needs, their opinions are valued and taken into consideration. They might buy into their vision, or they will buy into their vision and want to go in the same direction. So I think SMEs need to come out of this place where they're sort of saying, well, this talent isn't available to me. The absolute answer to that is the talent is available to you. It absolutely is, if you can communicate the things that we've been talking about, because that's what people want to buy into. And that goes back to, the location example from earlier on, is that's what people are looking for. And SMEs are, I mean, most of the businesses in the UK are SMEs, but we don't ever really hear about them. You hear about big companies and they've got the best people, but with technology and the way we are now, I think there's a really good opportunity for SMEs to take advantage of people who are thinking, I don't want to commute into a city every day for 2 hours each way. Or there are people who could be, so like for another massively market is mothers who had children, who've had children and they want to come back to work, but they can't work in a full-time environment. There's a whole massive group of people who are massively underutilized in the workplace and want to work. So something, and the same with like people with disabilities and from different backgrounds. There's a massive opportunity for SMEs to really get some top people, and it can be very cost effective now for them with the technology that we've got available. Like we're sitting here on Zoom, that can be free or very cheap. There's some cheap, there's Teams or Slack that you can use to communicate with each other. Everything's online now. So I think what they can do to future-proof their business is really look at the things that are important, which is, where are we going? Understand the things that we've been talking about. What is our vision? Where are we going? What are our values about? And then when they're looking for people, communicate those out in an effective way, and they will find some fantastic people, because they are out there.
Absolutely. I think that, as I say, the takeaways from that are try and broaden your horizons. Think about flexibility in all its forms and the utilisation of talent in different ways. And I've mentioned the model of flexible firm in a previous episode. but also to really, as I say, think outside the box in terms of where is your business going, being able to compete on a larger scale, and actually trying to match the people who you want to employ, the talent that's available, to the needs of the business. Because getting that cultural fit, even if it's something as simple, is absolutely key.
Yeah, I can agree. I think more. I think that people are looking for a place that they can fit and belong to, and that isn't so much necessarily a big company anymore. They want a work-life balance. They want to have the flexibility, and that's certainly something that SMEs can offer much more readily than a larger company can, because your voice, and also if you want your voice to be, or you want to be part of the direction of the company, and a small medium-sized company, you've got a much more stronger voice in that team. So you've got, if you can, if the employer can communicate that out, that they want that, you will attract the right people. As a candidate looking for a role, that's become much more important now, I think. Certainly post-COVID and Brexit as well. I think it's become much more important in the next year or so.
Okay, so have you got any other questions that you want to ask them, Kim? I think there was one on the bottom for both of us.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good one, actually. So where do you think the opportunities for business is with EDI as a business enabler?
I think the key thing is solving talent shortages, actually using the skills that people are likely to bring from diverse backgrounds, difficulties, opportunities, and actually using diversity and diversity of thought as a problem solver, as a way to be innovative, as a way to preempt problems and resolve them, or resolve the possibility of them becoming an issue before they do. I think in terms of flexibility, remote working, technology, I think that's absolutely key. Life experiences, work experiences are different for everybody, but getting that match and thinking more broadly is key. I think going forward, there are likely to be four significant or four categories of organisation for people to think about in terms of inclusion and talent or diversity. And that is those organisations that are fully, number one, those organisations that are fully sort of converted. They understand the cause, the solutions, the value of individual differences, of talent, of diversity of thought. Secondly, those that want to do a little bit more but need a little bit more work, but are willing to learn and be open and to communicate. Thirdly, those that go beyond, that don't discount it, but go beyond a standard policy-based perspective. They're willing to help, but within the remit of of existing provision, things like the guaranteed interview scheme that a lot of organisations run, and even the use of access to work. And finally, you've then got those organisations that really should be avoided in a lot of cases, aren't going to change, aren't going to adapt. And you really need to think, well, do I really want to work for this organisation? And not just do I really want to work for them, because sometimes wanting to work for an organisation is a necessity in terms of money and income. But can I even afford to cope at this organisation for even a short period of time. Because interestingly, the average job tenure now is around about 2 years, and the average cost of making a mistake in your hiring strategy, I've heard, is around about £10,000 on average.
Yeah, so it depends. So someone I know in the training space, he says it can cost anywhere between 3 to 5 times their first year's salary.
Yeah, absolutely. So
because if you think about obviously the time that you've taken to go through the recruitment, all the people that have been involved in it, the training, the onboarding, everything that goes is much bigger than just their salary that you've paid for. It's a quite an astronomical cost when you look at it.
yeah, so I think in summary, fitting of people around the needs of your business isn't just brilliant for obviously compliance and all of the other HR, the traditional needs, but is absolutely critical from a financial point of view in what's likely to be a very financially stretched and challenging world going forward. The key is to maintain that outlook, probably to understand where you've got to go immediately, and then look into medium and long-term options, but also see about pivoting businesses and creating organisations that fit a post-COVID world. I mean, one of the key developments in this, I guess, is the number of legitimate mask and PPE resellers that have come up, where they have rather obviously and innovatively capitalized on an opportunity, and it's about using the opportunities from COVID and the learning experiences to make a better place to live and work.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so many thanks for that, Kim, and I hope that all viewers and listeners enjoy this, and and it sounds as though Wavelength is on a great trajectory, and as I say, thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Well, no, thanks for inviting me on, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, it's been really, really good to chat to you today. So thank you very much.